Coming up today on the Nick Craig Show, are North Carolina taxpayers on the hook for a Chinese Communist Party-backed trip back in 2025? We'll have all the details coming up. And a good Thursday morning to you. Welcome into the Nick Craig Show, streaming live this morning on YouTube, Rumble, X, and Facebook. Don't forget, if you miss any portion of the program, you can take the show 24/7 on demand by checking out the Nick Craig Show in your favorite podcast app. You can also listen online by visiting the website nickcraig.com. Our program this morning brought to you by the Law Group here in Wilmington. For any legal questions or challenges, lawgroupnc.com, or give them a call, 910-251-6088. We'll hear more from them coming up a little bit later on in the program this morning. I caught a very interesting, and I mean very interesting, report over from a group called Defending Education. Back just a couple of months ago, we were joined by Terry Stoops from that organization as we covered the North Carolina Association of Educators, the NCAE, and their big walkout that took place here in North Carolina back a couple of months ago. And this report is highlighting a series of programs that took place across the United States that brought K through 12 and higher ed, that would be university students, to China on a foreign exchange trip. And while that doesn't sound too crazy, and exchange trips pretty consistently have happened and they will continue to happen, there are some concerning details in this report, including the fact that this exchange trip likely had very significant ties to the Chinese Communist Party, and additional questions about whether taxpayers were on the hook. One of the 30 K through 12 programs across the country that visited China and took part in this initiative was a public school in Wake Forest, North Carolina, known as the Heritage High School. And so we've got some concerning details on that. I want to go through some of the details in this report from Defending Education, and it starts off with a summary of what this program is, what exactly was going on here. So the summary starts off by saying this. For decades, the Chinese government and its affiliates have been engaged in a global soft power campaign called the Belt and Road Initiative, designed to advance the People's Republic of China's political and cultural agenda. This ongoing initiative includes various forms of programming intentionally aimed at American students from K through 12 through university level, meant to influence how the youth in the United States view China. Why is this relevant? Foreign exchange trips, as I just mentioned a second ago, have happened, have continued to happen, and will continue to happen. Why is this relevant now more than ever? Well, to be as blunt as I possibly can be about this, the Chinese Communist Party, President Xi Jinping, and China as a whole has a vested interest in seeing the demise of the United States of America. I don't say that lightly. I don't say that with any sort of tongue-in-cheek sarcasm. No, this is as serious as it possibly can be. It is very important to note that countries like Iran, countries like Russia, countries like China, who are what would be described as some of our largest adversaries on the national stage, they have a vested interest in seeing the demise of the United States of America. They are not in a position where they are allies and they want to see the United States prosper. The analogy, a rising tide raises all ships, countries like China and Russia aren't interested in that. They don't want to see the United States become stronger. They don't want to see the United States become energy independent. They don't want to see the United States in a level of prosperity. Why? Because the United States is their biggest threat on the national stage. They would love nothing more than to see the downfall, the demise, and the destruction of the United States of America. This is not a foreign exchange trip to London. This is not a foreign exchange trip to Australia. This is not a foreign exchange trip somewhere else throughout the world. We are talking about one of our, if no, not one of, the largest adversary the United States has in China that wants to see nothing but the worst for the United States of America. Back to this report. In 2023, Defending Education released a report titled Little Red Classrooms, China's Infiltration of America K-12 Schools, which exposed how many of the People's Republic of China's Ministry of Education and proxy groups fostered relationships with American K-12 schools and school districts to influence perception of the Asian nation. Through what the ministry called the Confucius Institute at the university level and the Confucius Classroom in the K-12 level, the People's Republic of China sponsored trips to China, funded entire university Confucius programs, and provided course textbooks and small grants to K-12 schools, including here in North Carolina. While Confucius programming appears to have ceased operations at the majority of the participating universities and K-12 schools following pressure from the federal government, another project seems to have popped up in its place. This program is called the Young Envoys Scholarship Program, or the YES program, run by the China Education Association for International Exchange, known as the CEAIE. It states that it facilitates study abroad opportunities for American youth to, quote, deepen and expand cross-cultural understanding among countries. Now, again, you might say, okay, well, some level of cultural background, so on and so forth. Again, we understand that. That's fine. This is where things take a pretty nasty turn. According to the China Education Association for International Exchange, on its website, it reads, and I quote, obviously translated to English, that the program is guided by Marxism, Leninism, and Xi Jinping throughout on thoughts on socialism, and always adheres to the leadership of the party and integrates the party's work into the entry process of the association's operation and development. On the Chinese website for this program that is in K through 12, or took place in K through 12 schools and universities across the United States, the program was guided by Marxism, Leninism, and of course pushed the Chinese president's Xi Jinping and his thoughts and his thoroughness on socialism. I would contend to you that there is nothing useful and beneficial for that here in the United States of America. We can learn about Marxism. We can learn about socialism. We can learn about Xi Jinping. We can learn about China in American textbooks as it relates to this kind of ideology. We don't need to send, and taxpayers don't need to fund students traveling to China to be told that Marxism is great, that socialism is great, that communism is great, that all of these other things are great. I would argue that provides absolutely zero educational opportunity for the United States of America. And it is totally absurd that taxpayers here in North Carolina, taxpayers across the rest of the nation, were on the hook potentially for some of these trips. Tell me what an American student is going to get out of learning and walking through this program that is guided by Marxism. Is that really what we want to be doing? We can learn about that stuff here in the U.S. We don't need to send 12 students over to China to learn about how communism and Marxism and Xi Jinping and socialism are the greatest things that have ever existed. That's absurd. But that's what was going on. That's what the whole point of this China Education Association of International Exchange and this Young Envoy Scholarship Program was set up for, to see the demise of the United States of America. How do you do that? Teach America's youth that communism is great. Teach America's youth that Marxism and socialism and Xi Jinping and China are the greatest nations that have ever existed. That is how you begin to see the demise and the destruction of the United States of America. That is how you begin the process of rolling back the fabric of this nation in everything that makes it so great. That's how this process begins. And it was something that was absolutely going on here in the United States of America. We are highlighting a brand new report from a group called Defending Education. The headline of that report, Little Red Classrooms, Young Envoys Scholarship Program. As we've gone through some of the details, this program was set up and run by the China Education Association for International Exchange. The name of the program, the Young Envoy Scholarship Program, or the YES program, and based directly on the Chinese website for this program, it claimed that the program was guided by Marxism, Leninism, and Xi Jinping on socialism. It adhered to the party, that's referring to the Chinese Communist Party, and it integrates the party's work into the process. This report, according to Defending Education, is a follow-up on the Little Red Classroom to highlight the ongoing efforts of the People's Republic of China and Chinese Communist Party-linked organizations to influence American students' perceptions of the communist country. This report included over 83 universities and 27 K-12 schools spanning 30 states that have been involved in the YES program, and includes links to newsletters that features glowing responses from those who benefited from the People's Republic fully funded experience. So here's a little bit of the background and as to how we got here. In November of 2023, Chinese President Xi Jinping invited 50,000 U.S. students to study abroad in China over the next 5 years as part of an initiative called the Young Envoy Scholarship Program. This program is run, as we know, by the China Education Association for International Exchange, with the program's organization being guided by communist, Marxist, and Leninist principles in China. This group, CEAIE, vows to, quote, always adhere to the leadership of the party, and U.S. lawmakers have already identified this program as part of China's United Front system. What is the United Front? It is an international influence operation aimed at neutralizing opposition to the Chinese Communist Party. Because again, if you're China, you obviously have a huge vested interest in making sure that the next generation here in the United States thinks that communism, thinks that the Chinese Communist Party, and thinks that Chinese leadership is the greatest thing ever. They have, the Chinese obviously have a vested interest in making sure that the United States thinks that China is a friend. China is an ally. Well, I'm here to tell you very clearly and very honestly, China is not a friend. China is not an ally. They want the perception to be that that's the case. They want the youth, they want the next generation to believe that that's the case. But you peel back just a couple layers of the onion, and it's very clear and obvious that China is interested in one thing and one thing only: to have complete and total dominance on the international stage with no objection from the United States of America. And that they want to have complete and total international control without pushback from one of their largest and probably their largest adversary, which would be the United States. How do you do that? You start convincing a bunch of teenagers and a bunch of individuals in their early 20s going through the university system in America that China is great, that everything that China does is great, that communism works absolutely perfectly. Ignore all of the human rights violations and all of the atrocities that take place in China. I would imagine that was probably not part of this YES program run by the China Education Association for International Exchanges. I'm sure that there was very little, if any, no discussion at all on some of the horrific things that take place in China. Children being forced into essential slave labor at very young ages so that Americans, funny enough, can purchase cheap Chinese goods on our store shelves. I'm sure that didn't make it into the discussion as to why China is so great. So U.S. lawmakers have already noted that this is a problem. a representative in just back last year in 2025, Representative John Mulliner, the Republican from Michigan, wrote a letter to local school leaders warning that, quote, student trips to China funded by CCP-affiliated organizations serve as propaganda and influence operations rather than genuine cultural exchanges. And that's the key, because if this was a discussion about a genuine cultural exchange, as I've already mentioned a couple of times, learning about other cultures is a good thing. I think one of the big issues, honestly, that we have here in the United States, and we see this a lot with those on the political left that talk about how great the Middle East is, right? They'll talk about how great Iran is as a country, right? They'll claim that they want to, free Palestine to the river to the sea, all this fun stuff, talking about how the culture over there is so amazing. The reason they think that and the reason they believe that is because they know nothing about said culture. They don't know anything about how women are treated, how gays are treated, how anybody else is treated in many of these same countries that they can't claim that they want to liberate and free. It's because there is a huge lack of any sort of geographical or historical knowledge as to what goes on in these places. And so if we were just talking about an exchange trip going to China, well, you'd obviously have to make sure that there was not a large level of CCP influence. That would be a different story. It is blatantly honest, literally from the program's website, what the goal is here. It's a propaganda campaign. It is a propaganda campaign to try and influence the minds of our nation's next leaders. That's the goal. Why would you go after individuals in their late teens and early 20s? Because eventually these individuals will be in positions of power, whether that be in the public sector or the private sector. And so if they can harken back to their, 11th grade trip to China and how amazing they were treated in China and how great China is as a country from all of our learning that we got quote unquote, from the CCP, maybe they'll view China as a friend. Maybe they'll view China as some great nation that wants to be buddy-buddy with the United States of America. The YES program is sponsored by organizations and businesses with concerning links to the Chinese Communist Party, according to Defending Education, including the United States Heartland China Association and the U.S.-China Business Council, as well as other groups. Roughly 83 universities and 27 K-12 schools have been documented as participating in China's Young Envoy Scholarship Program. Several university trips involve direct engagement with United Front-linked or state propaganda bodies, including the University of Chicago delegation visiting the Beijing People's Association for Friendship with Foreign Countries, what a name, and a Columbia University delegation attending a trip organized by the China-United States Exchange Foundation. Wow, what a name for some of these things. The Beijing People's Association for Friendship with Foreign Countries. Oh yeah, friendship. I'm sure that's what they're after. Absolutely. China and Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party, they're looking for a lot of friendship over there. All about the friendship. Everybody got to be friendly. This is a complete and total propaganda campaign played out on young people here in the United States of America. And I'm very grateful this report from Defending Education is out. We'll get into some more details on this on the other side. But before that, I want to tell you about the law group here in Wilmington and remind you that when legal challenges arise, make sure you put your trust in the law group right here in Wilmington. Since 2003, their experienced attorneys have provided high-quality, affordable legal services across Eastern North Carolina. Whether you're facing a divorce, navigating a real estate transaction, or maybe you're in a position where you need a strong defense, no matter the issue, the law group has your back. Their dedicated team ensures your questions are answered and issues are resolved as quickly as possible. Great news, folks. Melissa Gott and the team over at the Law Group are located here in downtown Wilmington. They're just a phone call away at 910-251-6088, or you can visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. That's 910-251-6088, or online at lawgroupnc.com. It's the Law Group. experience and dedication you can rely on. We appreciate the law group and their continued support here of the Nick Craig Show. Quick break. We'll dive into some details on North Carolina's involvement in this coming up as the Nick Craig Show continues on this Thursday morning, streaming live, YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, and available 24/7 wherever you get your podcasts. And a good Thursday to you. Welcome back to the Nick Craig Show as we continue coverage of a brand new report out from a group called Defending Education. We've been joined by Terry Stoops from Defending Education here on the program. He was on just a couple of months ago as we talked about that big North Carolina Association of Educators walkout, that protest that happened back a couple of months ago. They've got this new report out called Little Red Classrooms, highlighting a program called the Young Envoy Scholarship Program, which is for all intents and purposes, a political campaign by the Chinese Communist Party and the People's Republic of China to convince high schoolers and young university students that China, communism, socialism, Marxism, all of these ideas that are completely abject to what we have here in the United States of America and what makes this nation the greatest that has ever existed in human history, how all of those things are so great and how the Chinese have never done anything wrong. The human rights violations, all of the horrific atrocities that exist in China don't exist, have never happened. It is a full-on, full-throated assault on the United States of America. What is the relevance here? Well, you convince, as I've noted, a bunch of young people to believe that China is great. And then when those individuals mature, get into prominent levels of business, get into prominent levels of government, well, they'll have a very different view on China than the vast majority of Americans who believe, and rightfully so, that China does not have the United States' best interests at heart. The Chinese Communist Party, the People's Republic of China, wants to see the demise and the destruction of the United States of America. Why? Because we hold China in check. Because they aren't allowed to do things like completely absorb Taiwan, because there will be ramifications from the United States of America. We hold the Chinese Communist Party, we hold communism at bay as the United States. We've done this throughout history, and that is why these influence campaigns, these propaganda campaigns exist. And from a pure operational standpoint, this is a phenomenal idea if you're the Chinese Communist Party. If you're President Xi Jinping, it doesn't get much better than this. Get a bunch of influential minds over into China and convince them it is the greatest thing on God's green earth. It's a phenomenal idea. It seemingly has been pretty well executed, and it, of course, has some major ramifications. So let's tie in the North Carolina connection here. As I mentioned, this started back in 2023 when the Chinese president invited 50,000 U.S. students to study abroad in China over a 5-year period of time. In this, over the last couple of years, 83 universities, these would be colleges, and 27 K through 12 schools across the entirety of the United States program have been documented participating in this program. One of the K through 12 schools was right here in North Carolina, Heritage High School in Wake Forest. Heritage High School is a public school, receiving taxpayer dollars from individuals that live in Wake County and live throughout the rest of North Carolina. It is important to note, we talked about this with the state budget, that almost 50% of the state's budget goes to education. There is a large sum of your taxpayer dollars that fund public education throughout the state of North Carolina, including Heritage High School in Wake Forest, which is a K through 12 public school. So students from there spent 12 days in China last summer through this program, according to this report from Defending Education. According to Terry Stoops, who is the Director of Government Affairs at Defending Education, he said, quote, "Wake County residents should be alarmed that a Chinese government initiative designed explicitly to cultivate sympathy for the Chinese Communist Party infiltrated a public school funded by their hard-earned taxpayer dollars. Taxpayers rightfully expect children to pledge allegiance to the flag, not to pledge allegiance to Xi Jinping." Absolutely. He is spot on with this. And you might say, oh, well, the trip wasn't paid for by taxpayers. No surprise here. It was completely funded by the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. And while the trip itself may have been paid for, this is still a public school. You don't think there was any prep work that went into setting this thing up? You don't think that individuals within the school system spent hours upon hours setting up a trip for students to go to China, literally halfway across the globe? Of course there was. This is a taxpayer-funded program. I can't imagine that the individuals that were putting this thing on were doing this on their own private time, not when they were at work. And I'm not faulting them for that, but that's the tie-in here. Taxpayers here in Wake County, here in North Carolina, funded the setup for this trip. The Heritage High School trip is featured in the exchange program's own newsletter, which describes a 12-day visit that started back on August the 3rd, 2025 at the Hebei Petrol University of Technology in Northeast Beijing. And so as you go through some of the details in this newsletter, it highlights the program. It shows pictures of the students from the school here in Wake Forest visiting China. At the opening ceremony, this is directly from the program itself. This is not some secret private information. The YES program, the Young Envoy Scholarship Program, reported that the university's Communist Party committee in China, of course, because of course they have a Communist Party committee, the secretary of that committee presented the visiting students with a camp flag. The university president also told them, quote, "You are taking steps that will introduce the real China to the world, and your friendship will strengthen the foundation of China-U.S. cooperation." The real China. Nobody for 1 second should believe a word of that. But again, that's why I've called this now a propaganda campaign. Because I guess the rest of the world doesn't know the real China. The only people that can tell us about the real China are Communist Party leadership in China. They are the verified source of all truth and information. They are the arbiters of truth as it relates to China. And then this word again, your friendship will strengthen the foundation of China-U.S. cooperation. That's why this is an influence campaign. Get a bunch of teenagers who hopefully, because they are here in America, hopefully will go on to do great things for themselves and their families, rise to high levels of success, whether that be in the public sector or the private sector, and remember that they have a friendship. Remember this phenomenal experience that they had visiting China. It literally says, the university president literally said as much, strengthen the foundation of China-U.S. cooperation. And we know what that means. That means U.S. back off. China is not a foe. They use the word friendship right in their statement. China is a friend. China is an ally. That could not be further from the truth. China does not want to see prosperity and success here in the United States of America. China does not have my best interest at heart. China does not have your best interest at heart. And that's okay. It's a country literally halfway across the globe. I don't expect the Chinese to have my best interests in heart. I don't expect that to be the case. The same way that I don't think the United States has that same view with a bunch of other countries across the world. That's fine. But let's not sit here and blow smoke and pretend that China just wants this great friendship between the United States and the People's Republic of China, the Chinese Communist Party. Let's not kid ourselves here. Let's not pretend that there's not a major ulterior motive here for the Chinese Communist Party. There absolutely is. The Heritage students traveled as part of a larger American delegation. Their team leader was a Chinese language or a Chinese language teacher at Heritage High School who told the program that the trip would let her students, quote, witness Chinese's enhancing culture, time-honored history, and remarkable progress with their own eyes. Remarkable progress that has gone on in China. Remarkable progress. And these teenagers, these public school students from Wake County needed to see that with their own eyes. I am sure that they did. I am sure that was the goal of this trip. Make that play out in the way that it's happening. Oh yeah, they got to get over there. We got to make sure they witness the culture. Did they visit any, you think they visited any sweatshop factories over when they were in China? You think they saw like 8-year-old kids sitting on assembly lines producing a bunch of cheap Chinese garbage that's imported into the United States? Is that part of the enchanting culture that the Chinese language teacher at Heritage High School brought? You think that was part of the discussion? You think some of the civil and human rights violations, you think they were taught about that when they were visiting China? I don't know that I'd hold my breath on that. I don't know that I would say that was an important or a crucial part of this program that took place. We are rounding out the discussion on a brand new report from a group called Defending Education, which is shining a light on a program called the Young Envoys Scholarship Program that was set up by a group called the China Education Association for International Exchange, which has a very strong, very close connection to the Chinese Communist Party in the People's Republic of China, an indoctrination campaign set up by President Xi Jinping as back just a couple of years ago in 2023. His goal was to get more than 50,000 Americans in the K through 12 and university system to visit China and see all of the great things that are taking place in that nation. The newsletter, which highlighted this trip here in North Carolina, in which students from the Heritage High School in Wake Forest spent 12 days as part of this program. The newsletter quotes a 17-year-old Heritage High School student who spoke in Chinese at the opening events and said that she wanted to, quote, promote a two-way cultural exchange. According to the newsletter, students toured the Palace Museum, the Great Wall of China, and the Imperial Mountain Resort. They also participated in virtual reality oil extraction simulations, robotics demonstrations, and 3D printing workshops. So that's what was going on, at least publicly, with, of course, a very strong undertone of how great China is, how great communism is, how great Marxism is, how great socialism is. Because, at the end of the day, and we're seeing this in the United States take place now right here. We just talked about it, yesterday on the show? The rise of the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America. This stuff's already going on. And now you've got this major Chinese influence scheme and propaganda peddling campaign going on here in the United States. Back to some of the commentary from Terry Stoops from Defending Education. He pointed to a Wake County school board policy which states, quote, clubs and organizations established and sponsored by outside agencies or groups, which this obviously would fall under that category, shall not be considered school clubs and shall not function on school grounds or during the school day unless authorized by the principal. Stoops went on to say parents should ask whether the principal of Heritage High School authorized the Young Envoy Scholarship Program. If a policy violation occurred, the school board has a responsibility to hold the principals and any associated faculty and staff accountable. Now, this article over at the Carolina Journal has reached out to the Wake County Public School System to ask whether the trip received direct approval, how it was funded, and whether the funding source was disclosed to parents. When this story ran yesterday over at Carolina Journal, the author there, David Bass, who covers education topics across the state, there had been no response by that period of time. Defending Education is already in the process of sending public records requests to schools to identify that were identified in the program's newsletter and is already planning a follow-up report. Now, there were some other North Carolina entities that also had recently visited China. Both Duke University and Chapel Hill were among universities that took place in a fencing program that both schools, they were among 11 American universities to compete in a fencing competition that happened in Beijing 1 year ago in August of 2025. Stoops said that the North Carolina State Board of Education and the UNC Board of Governors should, quote, immediately prohibit all North Carolina public schools and universities from participating in the Young Envoy Scholarship Program or any other program with direct ties to the Chinese government, and that universities should disclose research and businesses tied to foreign nations and entities of concerns, particularly China and Russia. Stoops said malign foreign actors, of which China absolutely is, have a desire to access elite American research universities and thus educational institutions in the research triangle that are undoubtedly near the top of their list. As I mentioned back in the opening segment of the program, this is not the first time that something like this has had a flashlight shined on it. Wake County had also been previously identified in other Defending Education reports as it related to that Confucius Classroom program that I mentioned at the open of the show. That program is a Chinese government-backed language and cultural program that took place in nearly a dozen North Carolina school districts and schools, and singled out North Carolina for its closer scrutiny because of the state's 11 military bases that exist here in North Carolina. Citing the district's own budget documents, the report found that Wake County received $50,000 in the 2014-2015 school year from an arm of the China Ministry of Education to operate this Confucius Classroom program and project in 5 schools. They went on to receive another $50,000 in the 2016-2017 school year that was routed through a North Carolina-based nonprofit, surprise, surprise, called Go Global NC. As late as the 21-22 budget within Wake County Public Schools, the report found that the district was still running Confucius classrooms on carryover funds. Confucius programming has since ended at most participating schools. Why? Because there was significant pressure from the federal government, according to Defending Education. Why would there be direct pressure or significant pressure from the federal government to end these programs? Because, ladies and gentlemen, the Chinese Communist Party was giving money to public schools here in the United States of America, giving money to public schools here in North Carolina, K through 12 public schools, providing them with coursework, providing them with material and textbooks and everything needed to teach middle school and high schoolers how great China is. That is not a good thing. It's not. There is no educational value in that. And it is no surprise that the federal government tried doing everything in their power to cut this funding off, to make sure that these programs stopped. I don't know how many times I have to say it. China doesn't like the United States. China does not want the United States to be a successful, prosperous nation. How many times does this need to be stated? And nobody thought that this was a problem? This went on for potentially a decade here in North Carolina? For what purpose? Free money from the Chinese Communist Party? I mean, you gotta be kidding me. Give me a break. And so now that program has ended, because even the Chinese probably realized, yeah, this is probably a little bit overboard, sending money directly to public schools in the United States of America for them to teach propaganda about China. That's probably not going to fly long term. Okay, so we'll sunset that program, we'll wrap that program up, and we'll replace it with something else. Oh, I've got an idea. Let's pay for students to come to China, because then it's no longer under the control of the U.S. federal government. It's no longer under the control of the school boards and the local and state governments across the United States. I can guarantee you a real quick way to make sure that you achieve your goal of indoctrinating the next generation, just bring them to China. I mean, because then you don't have to deal with the U.S. federal government at all. You can teach all of your propaganda right out in the open. You don't need to hide it. You need to be secret about it. You don't need to pretend that it's some great classroom project that helps teach about culture or whatever other nonsense or BS they want to claim. That's what they replaced it with. And according to Defending Education, they argue that this Young Envoy Scholarship Program has essentially just taken the place of this Confucius Classroom program as well, and is continuing the goal of propaganda and influence over young individuals here in the United States of America. This should be a very concerning report for everybody in the United States. This should be a huge warning sign and a huge red flag for everybody. I've got a full copy of the report from Defending Education. That'll be linked up in the show notes over at patreon.com/Nick Craig. Wow. What a report. Very good work there from Terry Stoops and the team over at Defending Education that published this thing. And like we see with many of these groups, it is backed up. The report is very lengthy. There are screenshots. There's a whole bunch of information in this backing it up with exactly what was going on. Some very concerning details. We'll see if there's any fallout. We'll see if the Wake County public school system responds to this. We'll continue to keep an eye on this right here on the Nick Craig Show. Well, that's going to do it for a Thursday edition. Thanks to the Law Group here in Wilmington for their continued support. LawGroupNC.com if you have any legal questions or challenges. The Nick Craig Show streams live weekday mornings, 7 a.m., YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook. Available 24/7 in your favorite podcast app. And heard weeknights, 9 to 10 p.m. on WBT Radio in Charlotte. Enjoy your Thursday. We'll do it again tomorrow morning right here on The Nick Craig Show.